My name is Eliana Park, 33, and for as long as I can remember, I have wanted a door that closed behind me and stayed closed. I grew up in a red brick row house where privacy meant speaking in lowered voices and hiding anything precious in plain sight. 3 girls in one room, me, my older brother's overflow boxes stacked along the wall, my sister's hair tools hissing on the dresser, a permanent cue for the mirror. The only secret I managed to keep at 13 was a spiral notebook tucked into an empty Raisin Bran box under the bed. Even that was once found read aloud and laughed over in the kitchen because, as my mother put it with a smile that felt like a scolding, we don't hide things from family. By the time I moved out, I knew 2 things about myself. First, I wanted to make a life in which I could hear my own thoughts. Second, if I waited for my family, my own included, to understand that instinct before protecting it, I would wait forever. I worked long hours in brand strategy at a health tech company, slid into freelance projects on weekends, and siphoned the extra into a separate savings account I labeled North Star. It was not about money. It was a small private vow typed into a banking app: I will build a room that is mine. I did not tell Jonah, my husband, not because the marriage was broken. Jonah is kind to his bones, the sort of man who warms up the car in winter and remembers my mother's birthday before I do, but because he comes from a clan where front doors are suggestions and everyone has the same set of keys. His parents, Ruth and Gerald, ring the bell as they turn the handle. His older brother believes Tupperware is a communal resource. At Sunday dinner, the conversation is easy, loud, generous. So are the opinions about how we arrange the living room. When I once moved our armchair beside the window, my mother-in-law shifted it back while we were still clearing plates. Better, she said, patting the cushion as if she'd made the chair itself. I smiled and carried my argument inside my own mouth. North Star grew. Not through windfalls, but from modest, unglamorous choices. Mileage reimbursements from client visits that I didn't feel like I'd earned, the stipend from a mentoring program, the cash from a used book sale I ran in our apartment courtyard. 6 years is an eternity when you are saving for a thing you can't yet name aloud. It was long enough for people to stop asking when we would finally buy a house, long enough for me to rehearse telling Jonah about my place, not as a wedge between us, but as a tucked-away porch he could sit on with me when the noise of the world got rude. When the balance crossed a threshold I had been quietly moving in my head for months, I asked for time off. I could afford, and emailed a real estate agent who had a reputation for subtlety, Quinn Adebayo. We met at a coffee shop where nobody knew either of us. Quinn listened more than she spoke, then folded her hands around a porcelain mug and said, "We're not buying square footage. We're buying a feeling. Tell me exactly how you want to feel when you turn the key." I told her, alone without being lonely, held by trees, water near enough to sound like breathing. We spent half a year on back roads. We toured a moldy bungalow with a roofline that ducked like a shrug. We stood in a glassy new build that felt like a rental car. I learned what I didn't want neighbors close enough to wave to from the sink: a shoreline chewed by party boats, homes whose entire personality was the size of the island in the kitchen. Then one wind-bitten afternoon in early spring, Quinn took me to an A-frame cedar cottage on the north shore of Pine Glass Lake, set back on 1.7 wooded acres. The driveway curved like an invitation. The porch wrapped the house the way arms wrap a shoulder. Clerestory windows pulled the sky inside. I stood under the ridge beam with my hands in my pockets and thought, here. This is the sound of my own mind. The place wasn't perfect. The oven was 1970s avocado and wheezed. The deck had a lopsided grin where 2 boards warped. A bird had nested in the eaves and left small maps of itself on the stone steps. Perfect would have disqualified it. I signed with a pen that shook and pretended the shaking was excitement. Maybe it was. Standing in a small county office, I felt disloyal and relieved all at once, like skipping class on the first warm day of April, like speaking a truth that would be clumsy if said out loud. Quinn slid me a key. "To whatever it is, this will be for you," she said. I put the key on a split ring by itself and didn't attach it to my house keys. On the first evening, I stayed there alone. I did not unpack in the practical order. I started with the ritual objects. I set a stoneware mug on the sill that faced the water. I folded a wool throw in indigo over the arm of a thrifted chair with a low back. I lit a candle that smelled like rain on cedar and opened all the windows an inch. The lake had the calm of a held breath. Somewhere in the dark a loon called. The sound arrowed across the water and lodged under my collarbone. I slept on a mattress on the floor like a teenager who had moved out in a hurry and never planned to move back. In our suburban home, I described my weekends to Jonah the way I taught myself to describe feelings to people who did not share them neutrally with facts. A pottery workshop, a mentorship retreat, a long, slow day at the office because product was behind on a launch and my team was plugging holes. All were plausible. None were lies big enough to feel like a moral crisis. Each explanation smelled faintly of soap. Guilt wasn't the right word. Relief was closer, and the relief was so steady I mistook it for a temperature rather than a weather pattern. The cottage began to reflect me back to myself. I sanded the deck and oiled it until it glowed like toast. I replaced the oven and the rattling fridge with stainless pieces that hummed like good ideas. I painted the front door burnt umber and stenciled a small compass rose on the underside of the porch swing. I built a slim book ledge along the wall of the loft with my hands and a sander that bit when I forgot it could. I said yes to small purchases I'd been denying for years, linen sheets the color of unpolished river stones, a brass lamp with a pull chain that made a satisfying click, a record player that sounded like the first song on a Sunday morning. Decisions that would have demanded a family vote in the life I lived from Monday to Friday became a private conversation between the room and me, this here, that there. No to the rug. Yes to the plant. I learned the cottage at different hours. At dawn, light slid down the ceiling as if poured there. At 3 in the afternoon, the water went dull as metal. At 7, it threw gold in strips. At night, the porch was a theater for small things. A fox who calculated the distance to my shoes, bats thick as punctuation moths, headbutting the porch light until I switched it off and let the dark hold. I started ending work calls early on Fridays and leaving a bag by the apartment door, already half-packed jean sweater. The notebook that had replaced the old spiral, the key to the North Star on its own ring. The farther the cottage grew into itself, the more visible it became to me that our family ecosystems had rules of their own. My parents, Hannah and Luis, retired early and felt the sudden surplus of hours like an assignment. They babysat nieces, delivered soups in mason jars. We never returned in time, texted on Tuesday afternoons to say they were in the area and could they swing by. They volunteered my kitchen for holiday prep because mine had better counter space. When I expressed a preference, recabinets or visitors, or the simple wish not to host the reply, came in that particular tone families invent together and never abandon. Amused, fond, a little disappointed. Why get precious? We're your people. Jonah's family followed the same map with different street names. Their living rooms have bowls for keys by the door, everyone's keys. The phrase they use as a hall pass is, "It's us." It's us when they drop in unannounced. It's us when Ruth rearranges my knives into the drawer she swears makes more sense. It's us when Gerald calls on a Saturday morning to ask for our ladder, which returns on a Thursday with paint freckles new to both of us. Their love is real. Their sense of the line between mine and ours is simply creative. I told myself that when Jonah and I reached our 6th anniversary, I would take him to Pineglass Lake. I would plate grilled peaches on the porch and pour him the good Pinot I keep for guests who notice things. I bought a cotton napkin with stitched edges and embroidered a small N in the corner, not for my name but for the account that had delivered me here. I wrote a note on thick paper and slid it into a book on the cottage's shelf. A note that began, "I wanted you to see this the way I did the first time," and ended with his name written slowly so I could feel what it felt like to sign it without a tremor. In late summer, my job sent me to Europe for a pair of client workshops, bookending a leadership summit. Copenhagen, then Berlin, then home. The last night in Copenhagen, the sky turned the blue of old denim, and I ate dinner alone at a tiny counter facing a window. I thought of the cottage, whether the porch had cooled enough to sit outside with a blanket, whether the fox would come if I clinked a spoon against the mug. I texted Jonah a photo of the cinnamon bun I destroyed and wrote tomorrow planes and trains, then back to you. He sent me a picture of our balcony basil thriving in my absence, The next afternoon between sessions at the summit, my phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from Maeve, a woman I'd met only twice while walking near Harbor Point. Her place faces the mouth of the cove opposite mine. We'd shared a laugh about the way loons sound like a haunted violin, and had exchanged numbers in case a storm ever downed a tree across the lane. "Hey." "Random question," she said when I answered. "Are you hosting something tonight?" "No," I said, glancing automatically at the time difference, as if I could calculate my way out of the unease. "Why?" Maeve flipped her camera. Across a seam of water, my cottage was a lit lantern. The porch light never on when I'm not there, threw a pale halo on the steps. In the drive, I could count at least 4 cars. Figures moved inside, blurred at the distance undeniable. I pressed the phone closer to my face, as if proximity could change the facts. My breath went thin. "It's been busy for an hour," Maeve said, keeping her voice low, even though we were on the lake, and I was in a conference hall 3 time zones away. "I can walk around the cove and see what's what if you want. I don't want to trespass." "Don't go up to the house," I said. My voice sounded like somebody else's careful, pleasant, a person not alarming anyone. "If you can get a little closer from the trees and stay on the public path, would you show me again?" The camera jostled as Maeve started along the shoreline. The conference buzz slipped into a faraway hum around me. Someone behind me laughed. A mic squealed. There was only the small rectangle of the screen, and the view it offered my porch, my chairs, the sliver of rug inside the front door. A helium balloon bobbed in and out of frame with a congratulations script I didn't recognize. Through the front windows, a blur of a person crossed the room wearing a sweater that looked like mine, the slate cardigan I kept on a hook behind the bedroom door. Another figure lifted the lid on the record player and set the arm down. I couldn't hear the song through the phone, but I knew exactly how the needle sounded when it found the groove. Maeve stopped behind a stand of birch. "There are people in the kitchen," she whispered. 2 older, 1 younger. One of them has the confidence of someone who's cooked there before. My mouth tasted metallic. The screen slid past the island and caught a stack of plates I'd bought from a potter who signs the bottoms with a pressed fern. Someone gestured toward the drawer that holds the cutlery and pulled it open without looking. The refrigerator door swung wide. A hand settled on the handle like claim. I didn't speak for a moment. The world narrowed to a pane of glass, a cluster of lights, a room I knew from the inside showing itself to me without me in it. It was 5:17 p.m. in Copenhagen. The lake at Pineglass was having its own evening. My key lay in the pocket of the blazer I was wearing. On the screen, the front door opened wider, and more people stepped into the frame. I lowered the phone and lifted it again. "Stay where you are," I said quietly. "Please don't let them see you." Maeve's camera steadied. "Do you want me to keep recording?" I watched the balloon knock its soft head against the cedar beam. I watched a hand I did not know lift my stoneware mug from the windowsill. "Yes," I said. "Show me everything you can from there." The call timer kept counting. The cottage glowed. Somewhere a loon called once and went quiet. I stood in a room full of people, 3,000 miles away from the key I had kept separate on purpose, and understood that the place I had built to hear myself had been filled with other people's voices. Maeve's camera held steady, as if her hands had trained for this kind of stillness. Light pooled in the cottage windows and spilled down the porch steps. People drifted through the rooms I knew by heart, a blur of a shoulder. A glass lifted someone leaning an elbow on the kitchen island I'd sanded until it felt like river rock. A laugh reached the phone, as a vibration more than a sound. I tried Jonah first. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail, his voice bright and ordinary. "Leave it here. I'll circle back." I sent him 3 short texts, urgent. "Call me now." "FaceTime if you can," and thumbed back to Maeve's feed. Still the same cars I asked. She angled the phone to catch the driveway at a slant. 4 at least. There was a 5th that turned around. The camera eased to the porch. "I can see a banner in the living room, like a party banner." "What does it say?" Maeve squinted. "Congrats, that's all I can make out from here." She hesitated. "Do you want me to call the sheriff?" The question landed like cold water. I pictured a deputy's cruiser sweeping my gravel, a polite knock on a door that would open to people who shared my last name. "Not yet," I said. "Please keep your distance. If anyone wants to talk to a stranger in the trees, let it be me, not you." She nodded, breath thin in the microphone. I'll stay put. I'll keep recording. My phone buzzed again. Jonah's name at last. I accepted and he came on in a rush. You okay? What's happening? I need you to watch something. I layered his call over the video Maeve was still sending and told him what he was seeing. That is Pine Glass. A beat of silence. Your place. Our place, I said, because it felt less brittle to say it that way, even if the facts hadn't caught up. The cottage. Someone is there. Many someones. He exhaled hard enough that the sound fuzzed the speaker. Who? I don't know yet. Maeve thinks older and younger, 3 in the kitchen, others in the living room. There's a banner. I'm leaving work, he said, voice flattening into the gear it takes when he moves toward a problem. Send me the address. Jonah, did you know about this? The question surprised us both. It had been waiting under the others with its coat on, ready to go. He didn't fill the space. I didn't know you had a place at Pine Glass, he said carefully. I know now. Send the address. I sent the PIN and the gate code. If you're lying to me, tell me now. I'm not, he said. I'm on my way. Maeve stayed with me through the drive. She whispered the small things that proved the scene was real, a hand I didn't recognize scooping ice from the freezer, the record player being lifted and said a guest tapping a knife on the counter to call for a toast I could not hear. I watched the cottage hold strangers the way a borrowed coat holds a stranger's shape. Headlights, Maeve breathed. Her camera tacked to the lane. A car nose glowed through the trees and eased into the drive so quickly the porch light grazed the hood before the engine cut. The driver's door opened hard enough to throw a sound even across the water. That's him, I said. That's Jonah. He didn't knock. He crossed the porch in 3 long strides, pushed the door wide and walked inside. The view from Maeve's angle turned to pantomime limbs, faces, mouths. People stilled. Someone pointed. In the kitchen, a woman set a plate down too quickly, and the stack shivered. Bodies shifted from open to closed, from amused to irritated to defensive. The banner wavered in a draft from the door and turned its simple looped word the wrong way. Maeve didn't narrate. She just kept her frame. We watched in a strange, suspended quiet as one car reversed down the drive and another followed it. A third idled, while its driver did the slow walk of someone attempting not to be seen running. The porch light caught a familiar profile. For half a second, my mother's haircut on a head held at a stubborn angle, and then the figure tipped out of the frame. Within 20 minutes, the drive was empty. The porch light went off. Maeve whispered, "He's still inside." My phone rang. Jonah again. I switched, and his face filled the screen. He looked like he'd been running his hand through his hair for an hour. His voice dropped to an undertone I knew from hospital waiting rooms, and the aftermath of chin stitches, and the time the pipe burst above our bookshelf. They're gone. He turned the camera so I could see what gone meant. Half glasses abandoned on the sill. A glass ring on the book ledge. The record player's arm left too far over the vinyl so the needle ticked in an impatient circle. My linen napkin wadded next to a knife, as if someone had pressed it to a damp spot and walked away. A red loop blooming on the far cushion of the chair I loved. I'm sorry, he said, pulling the view back to his face. I am so sorry, Elle. How did they get in? He slid his free hand into his pocket, like he needed his fingers to hold still. Your mother had a key. My mouth went dry. How? She wouldn't say. She said it was a family place and they were celebrating. That was the phrase. Did you know about any of this? He shook his head once. No, not until your call. Stay there tonight, I said. Please. I don't want anyone doubling back. I'll stay, he said. I'll start cleaning up. I'll make a list of what I see. I won't move anything you'd want to see in place. Thank you, I said, and ended the call before the thank you turned into something else. I rebooked my flight at a kiosk that didn't care what it cost me, and packed in 7 minutes. In the morning, Copenhagen receded into a blue-gray that matched the airport benches. I slept in pieces across the Atlantic and woke to the outline of a city I recognized. Adrenaline makes a person feel present and absent simultaneously. I moved through customs as if I'd been coached, walked past baggage claim with a tote that held the only things I'd cared to carry, and saw Jonah standing by the rail with his hands in his jacket pockets looking for me in the line of people coming toward him. On the drive home, the city was itself construction cones, a truck nudging into the wrong lane, a woman walking a dog who wanted to greet every mailbox. The silence in the car wasn't hostile, just thick. We spoke around it the way you talk around a sleeping child. He said Maeve texted that she'll keep an eye out. She gave me her number. Good, I said, and watched the cement medians pass like unspooling film. On our stoop was a basket wrapped in cellophane and ribbon. Jonah carried it inside and set it on the table. The card slid loose, sorry for the mix-up. Love, Mom and Dad. The handwriting was my mother's neat schoolteacher script, the letters all keeping to their lines. We sat. The basket sat. I said, tell me everything. He told me from his side. 4 weeks earlier, my mother had called him while I was at a late meeting. She had been in our apartment looking for the family photo albums, the kind of phrasing she deploys like a hall pass, and had found papers that concerned her. He asked what papers. She said she didn't want to worry him until she understood what she was seeing. The next day she called him again with a tone he described as tender, frightened, reasonable. She thought I might be hiding something from him that made her sad for him. She thought it was better to talk this through together than to bring me in a fragile state. She had always loved him as a son. She wanted to make sure he felt safe. Did she say what she found, I asked? She said there was a closing statement with your name, he said. A security installation invoice with a new address. A business card for someone named Quinn. He looked up. Is that your agent? Yes, I said. Quinn Adebayo. She asked if I knew about any of it. I said I didn't. She said she had driven out to see the place she was afraid you were planning to leave me and wanted to make sure you were okay. He let his eyes close and open them again. She said it was beautiful. She said maybe you'd meant it as a family retreat all along, but were waiting to share it when it felt finished. The room seemed to tilt and right itself. You didn't tell me, I said, and heard the point inside the sentence. I should have, he said. I should have come to you that night and asked. I was hurt that you hadn't told me, and I let that feeling vote. He looked at the basket on the table as if it had asked a question. She had a key on her ring when I saw her last week. I pictured the small tin in the home office drawer where I keep bus tokens from cities I miss, and one smooth beach stone, and for 2 weeks in May the cottage key, because I hadn't decided where to hide it at home. I pictured that tin opened by hands that never thought of themselves as prying, just helping, and the key slipped into a pocket with a note to make a copy before returning it to the lip of the tin, where even a careful person wouldn't notice the slight rearrangement. Let's go, I said, standing. I want to see. Pine Glass is 45 minutes if the road behaves. We didn't turn on music. Jonah drove with both hands on the wheel like the car needed to know he meant it. The closer we got, the more the trees stopped being green and started being the particular green of that shoreline. The cottage roofline pulled into view, and I felt my throat close the way it does at a funeral when the hymn starts and you've told yourself you won't cry. The door stuck slightly as it always does when the air is damp. The standing air inside smelled like whatever they had cooked mixed with the candle I'd left on the mantel. Jonah let me walk ahead of him and then hung back as if space were something he could be careful with now that he recognized it. The damage was not dramatic enough for photographs, which made it worse. Scenes of use rather than scenes of wreckage. A slice gouged in the coffee table's finish where someone had dragged a box across without lifting. A seam of wine on the sofa cushion as if a joke had landed so hard it cost a glass its balance. In the kitchen, a tub of yogurt. I don't buy my father's favorite beer in the fridge, a kind of mustard nobody in my house eats. The drawer that holds the corkscrew half opened, the corkscrew laid on top because the person who used it had not felt the need to finish the small task of putting it back. I moved through the rooms the way you move through a museum of your own life. In the second bedroom closet, a tackle box I recognized from my father's shed, the stickers on the lid curling at the corners. On the bulletin board by the phone, I keep for spotty cell days, a flyer for a book club with dates circled, and a name underlined my mother's. In the bathroom, a cosmetic bag I'd seen on my sister's sink, the zipper bitten. I opened the kitchen island drawer where I keep spare batteries and found a sheet of paper torn from a legal pad with a list that read like a sign-up June 3 to 4, Mom and Dad. June 10. Ruth, Gerald dinner. June 17 to 19. Mina, Callum maybe, friends. July 1st, Caleb asks about fishing weekend. Beside July 15th, someone had written book club on the porch and drawn a tiny doodle of a wine glass. I put the paper down like it was hot. They were scheduling. Jonah read the list, the small shake back in his hands. I didn't know he said. I knew she'd been once. I didn't know she turned it into this. We stepped outside because the air inside had turned thin. Maeve had texted a wave emoji earlier. Now she sent a photo taken from across the cove, 2 chairs on my porch with their backs to the lake, as if they'd spent all night listening in the wrong direction. While we stood on the steps, Mr. Dugan from the next property slowed his truck and lifted a hand. "City family," he called cheerfully. "That was a heck of a gathering y'all had." Jonah answered before I could. "Different family," he said, voice level. "Won't be happening again." We went back in. I opened the sideboard, found a stack of envelopes. Water bill forwarded to my apartment with the forwarding address written in a hand that wasn't mine. Internet provider notice with a password reset I hadn't requested. I found Quinn's business card in a place I hadn't left it. My mother's reach had never been about malice. It had always been about a belief so deep it didn't know itself as belief that the word ours can swallow mine without either party noticing the moment of consumption. That night, we stayed at the cottage because leaving felt like an invitation to repeat the day. Jonah took the second bedroom and closed the door quietly in a way that made the wall between us feel merciful. I made the bed with the linen sheets that still smelled faintly of the oil I'd rubbed into the wood of the frame. I lay on my back and stared at the beam in the ceiling and let my body register how anger feels when you give it a name. The lake sent its usual nighttime sounds, the soft clocks of water against the rocks, one barred owl with impeccable timing. My phone hummed with texts. I didn't answer, my mother's confusion braided with apology, my sister's exasperation disguised as smirking advice, my father's heartburn humor that used to diffuse things and now just laid a damp blanket over them. Ruth sent a photo of a casserole cooling on her counter. In the morning, I walked the perimeter of the property. The woods held themselves the way they had always held themselves. Small tracks pressed the damp soil by the shed. In the gravel of the drive, there were arcs where tires had rolled too fast in the dark. Everything important about the place was still present. Everything important about what it meant to me had been made visible by absence. Over coffee, Jonah sat at the table, the way a person sits at a desk they used to share with someone they hurt. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't apologize the way people apologize to jump to the relief of it's okay. He just said, "I want you to tell me what you need." I watched the steam lift off the mug. The answer arrived not as a strategy, not as a plan I would one day execute, but as a sentence that felt like the right size for my mouth. "I need time here by myself," I said. "Days, not hours." He nodded once. "Say when you want me to leave." After breakfast, I said, "I'll stay a week." He swallowed and set his cup down so gently it didn't clink. "I'll bring up groceries before I go. I'll take the basket back with me." "You can leave the basket," I said. "It belongs in a picture, not here." We cleaned deliberately. He lifted the sofa cushion and blotted the stain with seltzer like a person who'd studied. I wiped the counters with the good cloth, as if the cloth could learn something from the work. In the sink, I found a spoon with an unfamiliar nick and placed it in a separate spot, as if isolation could teach it my rules. In the drawer with the legal pad list, I laid a blank sheet of paper on top of the filled one and closed the drawer. Before he left, Jonah stood in the doorway and turned back into the room, as if he wanted the room to know he was not going to rearrange it. "I'm sorry for not coming to you when your mother called me," he said. "I see that now as a separate wrong. I didn't protect your space because I didn't understand the cost of not protecting it. I had nothing useful to hand him back and didn't pretend otherwise." "Lock the gate behind you," I said. He did. I watched his taillights sink into the trees and then be taken by the curve in the lane. I stood with my key in my hand and listened to the sound the lock made when it turned. Then I walked to the kitchen, pulled out the drawer that held the legal pad, and set a pen on top of the blank page so that when I sat down later, I would not have to go looking for it. The cottage was quiet. The lake breathed. I began to take inventory of what had been moved, of what remained, of what had announced itself as mine by the way it waited to be touched one room at a time. I started with the obvious, anything that didn't belong to me, went into boxes with names on painter's tape. Ruth and Gerald on a stack of casserole dishes I'd never seen before. Dad on the tackle box that still smelled like river water and WD-40. Mina on the cosmetic bag with a bitten zipper and a tube of lipstick the color of pomegranates. I lined the boxes by the door as if the door itself had a job now. The scratch on the coffee table yielded to 400 grit and oil. The stain on the cushion lightened under seltzer and salt until it was a ghost instead of an injury. I stripped the bed and washed the linen until it stopped smelling like unfamiliar perfume and started smelling like the cedar that lives inside the closet. I put the record back in its sleeve and let the sleeve rest where it had been before, spine facing out, title visible, like a name on a mailbox. By mid-morning, a locksmith named Riley pulled into the drive in a blue van with a plastic owl on the dashboard. He listened without commentary, the way people in certain trades learn to listen, and changed the front back, and shed locks with a quiet efficiency that felt like kindness. He gathered the shiny old cylinders into a Ziploc titled Customer Keeps and handed it over like a bag of extracted teeth. "New keys are cut on restricted blanks," he said, testing the latch with his shoulder. "Harder to duplicate without me knowing." I added a deadbolt to the porch door. "Weather will swell it. Pull tight." The security tech came that afternoon, a woman named Sasha, with a coil of cable over her shoulder and boots that didn't complain on gravel. She mounted a doorbell camera, and 2 motion lights showed me how to set zones so deer wouldn't ping my phone every hour waited, while I renamed the network and set a password that only lived in my head. "You'll get push alerts," she said, handing me the tablet. "If someone stands here long enough to read the rules you just posted, you'll know." The rules were on this bulletin board by the kitchen phone, printed in 12-point type and taped square. I wrote them as statements instead of wishes. No entry without explicit invitation from me. Visits scheduled at least 2 weeks ahead in writing. No posting photos or location of the cottage. No sharing address codes or keys. No copies. Violation EU's 6 months with no access. I read them out loud once, not for ceremony, but to hear how they sounded in air that belonged to me. The meetings happened in neutral zones. I met Hannah halfway between the lake and the city, in a coffee shop with iron chairs that tilted the slightest bit toward the table. She arrived with the expression she reserves for difficult goodbyes and tricky recipes. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, before the foam on her cappuccino settled. I thought you'd be happy we were celebrating Mina. Your place is beautiful." "It's not our place," I said, and set the bag of keys on the table between us. "It's mine." "How did you get the key, Mom?" She glanced at the bag as if it were a small animal. "You'd left it in that tin with the bus tokens." "I worried Eliana. I thought you might be leaving Jonah. I wanted to be sure you were safe. Did you copy it?" She touched the rim of her cup. "I did." "Please hand me every copy," I said, and waited. She dug in her purse and produced 3 keys on various rings, their metal faces identical to the one Riley had taken away. The gesture was both contrition and proof of exactly what needed repair. "I put rules on the wall at the cottage," I said. "They're not requests." Her eyes shone in that way that gathers sympathy like lint. "We're your family, and I'm your adult child," I said quietly. "Would you come into my bathroom without knocking, read my journal, take money from my wallet because we're family?" "That's different." "It isn't," I said. "If you want to be at the cottage, you wait for an invitation and you accept no as an answer." She sat back as if the chair had changed its tilt. When she reached for my hand, I let her take it. She squeezed once and then for once didn't say anything else. Mina wanted to meet at a nail place where acetone laced the air, and women spoke to each other over fans. She flicked the sample ring with her finger. "You're mad about a sofa," she said. "You know that, right?" "I'm not mad about a sofa," I said. "I'm mad that you treated my house like a group chat." She smiled with the side of her mouth that always looks like she knows a better joke. "We grew up sharing. You of all people. That's why I bought a door that locks," I said. "You wore my sweater from the hook behind the bedroom door." "It looked better on me," she said, automatic. "It looked like mine," I said. "Until you apologize and agree to the rules, you're not welcome there." She rolled her eyes with affection that felt like custody. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being specific," I said. "Keys, codes, dates, consequences. That's not drama. That's math." Louis suggested a diner with laminated menus and coffee that refilled itself. He slid a paper bag across the table with the tackle box inside and said, "Your mother says I have to give this back with my own hands." He chuckled in the way that used to soothe me when I was 12, and breaking rules I didn't believe in. She meant well. "Intent isn't the same as permission," I said. "Dad, I need you to call before you come to my house. Not swing by because you're close. Not we were in the area. Call, ask, wait." He stirred his coffee with a fork, realized, and put the fork down. "I can do that," he said, and looked relieved to have a job instead of a debate. Back at the cottage, I stacked the boxes labeled for each of them in the entry and texted times they could pick them up from our apartment not here. Maeve sent a message that just read "no cars on the lane since yesterday" and a photo of the cove in morning fog. I thanked her and promised bread the next time her oven was on. When Jonah drove up Friday night, the gate clicked behind his bumper and then settled into its latch like the end of a sentence. He knocked. When I opened the door, he stayed on the threshold until I said his name and stepped back. On the table, the printed sheet of rules sat under a smooth stone from the lake. He read each line like he was being briefed for a procedure. "These are clear," he said. "They're non-negotiable." He nodded. "I agree to them." "I need more than agreement," I said. "I need you to enforce them even when I'm not in the room." He reached into his pocket and set his cottage key on the table. "I'll ask when I'm coming," he said. "I won't share the address. I won't tell anyone the code. If I see someone posting a photo from here, I'll tell them to take it down and I'll call you." He took out his phone. "What's the new network name?" I told him. He typed it, then put his phone face down as if it were a person who needed to pay attention. "I want to tell you something," he said without the performative inhale he uses when he's about to make a case. "When your mother called me with her worried voice, I wanted to believe her because that meant I didn't have to feel hurt. That was cowardly. And I didn't come to you because I didn't want the conversation where I admitted I was hurt. That was selfish. Both got us here. I shouldn't have kept the cottage from you," I said. "Not because you own it, but because you're married to me." We stood there among facts. He glanced at the boxes by the door. "Do you want help carrying those down to the car when you're ready?" "Yes," I said, "tomorrow." We cooked eggs, toasted a pan of tomatoes that burst and sweetened in oil. He washed, I dried. When he reached for the knife drawer, he paused, looked at me, and then reached for the towel instead. Small corrections registered in the room like the clock resetting after an outage. When we'd finished, he walked the perimeter outside with the dogged patience he brings to puzzles, testing latches, noting which motion light caught the maple and which caught the gravel. I watched from the porch with the weight of the new key in my pocket, and the door at my back still aware of it, less afraid of it. Later, with the windows open, I rewound the day in the language of objects locks that turned with resistance in the right places. A camera that blinked once when a moth brushed it. A paper on the board that asked nothing, the room couldn't answer. Jonah sat in the chair by the hearth and didn't move it. He looked at the rules again, and then at me. "Do you want me to sign it?" he asked. "Date it," I said, "and write your name legibly." He smiled a little and did. The pen left a line that looked like a small seam in a piece of wood, deliberate visible part of the grain now. When he capped the pen, the tiny click sounded like punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been drafting for years. We didn't toast anything. We didn't talk about how to fix what couldn't be measured. We moved through the rooms we shared and let the rooms answer their own questions. This here, that there. The door closed, the door opened, the porch light off. The lake kept its rhythm against the stones. On the table, the paper lay flat under the stone, and under the paper the wood shone where I'd oiled away the scratch. 6 months later, the porch boards no longer remember the drag of that cardboard box. The cushion's red ghost has faded to the palest echo. When the doorbell camera lights in the evenings, it is Deer nosing the viburnum, or Maeve setting a bag of bread on the step with a thumbs up toward the lens. The rules on the bulletin board have 2 new signatures in tidy ink below mine and Jonah's. Under the board sits a ceramic dish where return keys sleep like coins. Hannah texts now. "Here till 2 on Saturday. May we stop by for an hour?" The first time she came by invitation, she stood just inside the door as if she were on a boat and needed to find her balance. She handed me a wind chime nested in tissue and asked where it should live. I pointed to the corner of the porch that takes the western breeze. She waited while I tied the knot. She did not open a single cabinet without asking. When the kettle boiled, she stayed in her chair and said, "If you tell me where the cups are, I'll get them next time." Luis asked, before plugging in the small radio he carries everywhere. When it hummed to life, he kept the volume low enough that the lake could keep speaking over it. Mina stayed distant until she wasn't. She called on a Tuesday night with quiet traffic in the background and said I didn't like being told I couldn't come. Then I argued with Callum about his studio, and I heard myself, and it sounded like someone who thinks a lock is a dare. We didn't solve anything on that call. 2 weeks later, she asked if she could come for a night, just the two of us. She arrived with a tote and no commentary, set her phone face down on the shelf, and walked the rooms like a guest. When she wanted a blanket from the chest, she asked. When she left in the morning, the bed was made so neatly the corners could have bounced a coin. On the kitchen island, she placed the cabin key on top of a note that only said thank you for the door. Ruth and Gerald learned the shape of no. At Thanksgiving in the city, Ruth reached for the knife drawer, paused, and moved her hand to the towel instead. Later, she peered at a photo on Jonah's phone of the porch and said, "It does look better with the chair by the window." Gerald asked if he could borrow the ladder. Jonah said yes and added, "Text me when you're done, and I'll swing by then. Kept the ladder in our garage after." The absence of irritation in that exchange felt like a small renovation no one would ever see on a blueprint. On Tuesdays, Jonah and I sit on a pair of green chairs across from a woman with a legal pad. Sometimes nothing dramatic happens. I say how certain words land. He talks about the part of him that wants to fix and the part that wants not to be blamed. We practice speaking in ways the other person can understand. Sometimes I notice a change when we're not there. He asks, before inviting anyone for the weekend. He tells group chats, "We don't do drop-ins. Please check with me or Elle first." He knocks when I'm working in the small loft that is my office here, then waits in the doorway until I look up. I host small things now, the kind that fit in a single breath. Maeve comes with a jar of pickled beans and a story about otters at the far inlet. 2 friends bring a lemon tart that cracks clean under the knife. We light the fire pit, and the smoke finds my sweater threading itself into the weave. When the chill deepens, I go inside to fetch another throw, and the door gives under my hand with that slight damp weather resistance I've come to expect and like. The brass plate Jonah had made hangs by the frame North Star at the top, and beneath it, in his steady block letters, "Enter by invitation. Leave as you found it." He screwed it in level, and then stepped back, palms flat at his sides, as if to show the room he was finished moving anything. Later, when everyone has gone, and the embers are thinking about their last light, I walk the short path to the dock. The lake is dark as a countertop, and the sky is full of small conversations between stars. Behind me, the porch chime speaks once, and then is quiet. I lock the door, pocket the key, and feel its weight settle. Inside, the rules on the board look ordinary and necessary, like measurements penciled into the margin of a recipe you've finally adjusted to taste. I turn off the porch light, and the windows become mirrors, returning the room to itself. The cottage holds its shape. The water keeps its count against the stones. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.